up, I never really heard about fighting back, and it always seemed that the older Chinese community felt like we should always be quiet and we should always try to conform and not rock the boat. So this was my way of giving their voice back to this incident. Sorry? One of the other things that was really influential to me were my parents, and as Sid had mentioned, my mother worked for socialist lawyer Andrew Zhou, and my father ran a Chinese communist bookstore on East Hastings. And he was also really engaged in the community as well, but at the time, contrary to the way it is now, there were very few people that had actually immigrated past 1947. And before 1947, and then 1948, there's the family reunification process that took place, and so these families came together, and my father came in on that wave. But I think that he and a lot of other people, including Faye's late husband, Dean, who were contemporaries of my father, they were coming in from China, and they had a different sense of what it meant to be Chinese. And I think with my father's generation and the people that were had come at that time, he probably differed from a lot of them because he believed in opening up the world to what China was doing at that time. So from the 60s, mid-60s to probably the early 80s, he opened this Chinese communist bookstore and made absolutely no money with his Chinese venture. I guess, like, nobody would come here now and open a Chinese bookstore, communist bookstore from China, because it would make no money. But that's the kind of person my father was. He really believed in helping in the community. And for me, it was a very difficult process to reconcile because I was a child of a capitalist system, and all I could believe and think of was how can I be more selfish than I already am? And everything and all my parents' teachings were totally against that. So it was hard for me to figure out that, especially being a teenager. So the next film I'm going to show you is a little bit about the reflection that I had of my father, who for a couple of decades was on East Hastings, and the time that I spent going back and forth around Chinatown, and a very different Chinatown than it is today. So, and it's called Comrade Dad.
Chairman Mao said we should be modest and prudent, guard against arrogance and rashness, and serve the Chinese people heart and soul.
I had mixed feelings walking down Skid Row. Sometimes it felt like home, but most of the time it was a scary place.
Stop that! Stop!
Like my father's bookstore, we were watched, sometimes threatened, but usually left alone. But it was always a relief when we'd reached the safe haven of our father and the great proletariat leader himself, Chairman Mao Zedong. All the fathers of socialism were there too, Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Stalin. Their presence was a comforting sight to me as a kid. But it was still the chairman who won my heart. Every day I neatly arranged his little red books, quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong. As young kids, we saw ourselves as Mao's little red guards. Even so, my parents made sure I was a well-adjusted Canadian kid. Sometimes I learned the tunes of Bach and Mozart, and other times I sang songs from the Cultural Revolution. No Bible study for me. Instead, I learned quotations from Chairman Mao and engaged in art and culture that was geared to definite political lines.
So these are just excerpts from the films that I made, and you can see the full film online if you look them up somewhere. I just want to show you one more film. Because I was so influenced by my father to sort of get to know my culture and also understand what it meant not to be Chinese and to be Chinese. I went to China after he passed away in 1982, and I spent a couple of years there learning Chinese because I felt so inadequate that I couldn't speak any Chinese, couldn't read and write Chinese, so I went there and I studied for a while. And one of the things that I did after I was filmmaking was to really question where my identity was, and there was another whole community of young girls that were coming into this country that also were questioning their identity, and that was girls that had been adopted from China, and all the issues that they had been grappling with were also some of the issues that I grappled with when I was growing up and I was really young, about racism and internalized racism and what was my culture and so on and so forth. There are many more issues for adopted children from China, and all the questions around infanticide and gender inequality and the one-child policy. So I made a film called Made in China, and this is again just an excerpt of some of the girls that I interviewed that talked about their experiences. And in fact, it was one of the first films that gave voice to their feelings and their experiences, because prior to that there were a lot of films that were made about the parents that had adopted the children and what they were going through raising intercultural children, but nobody ever actually asked the children how they felt being visibly adopted in Canada. So this next film is just an excerpt from that.
This was the hat that I was wearing when a lady found me. And these are pants, Chinese pants. And these are the shoes I used to wear when I was a baby. This is a note from my mother in China that she left with me. It says the hour and the date and the month that I was born. That's all? Yes.
You want to get the bigger size?
Yeah, I love that.
It's kind of fluffy, honey.
But I like it fluffy.
Annie's got this marker on her back, it's a little triangular shape, and in my words, it looks like a branding, and Phil's, it looks like a surgical cut, purposeful. And I guess my fantasy is that her mother couldn't keep her, but attempted to for the first few weeks, and found she couldn't. Come here. What do you think? there's thousands of women who have had to give up their children. I mean, and I talk to people about this, that we have no concept of this being imposed on us, this one-child policy, this draconian policy, and people get pregnant and they bury these children and they're in love with them as we are, and then to have to give them up. So maybe that'll, if one day she wants to search, maybe there's a mother searching there for a child with this mark on it.
Elle nous est arrivée un soir ici, puis elle nous a dit, est-ce que c'est vrai, maman, que les petites filles en Chine, on les tue, ou quelque chose comme ça. Il y avait eu un reportage à la télé, puis ça avait fait des histoires un peu...
D'effrayer les manchettes.
Je le savais parce que tout le monde en parlait, mais comme surtout les filles, là, ils mettaient souvent les filles en adoption là, dans les orphelinats, là, parce que les garçons ils étaient plus importants, là, puis faisaient plus de choses, là, comme ils étaient plus utiles. Là.
Ça avait créé une grande angoisse pour qu'on décide d'aller parler des jeunes filles chinoises en classe au niveau de ça. Et on avait fait tous les enfants de l'école. Et à partir de ce moment-là, tout était réglé.
Démystifié.
Démystifié.
Ouais.
Exactement, on avait démystifié un peu ça.
She's gonna know that she's a dog for them. You know, why not? We have cousins. Peter has cousins who are adopted. I have cousins who've been adopted. It's kind of a non-issue. And
there's no point in delaying it or not making it part of what, you know, the whole family experience is, and making her conscious of it.
No, we don't do that, honey. We'll squash the bread.
Squish the bed! Squish the bed!
We went to corner brook with my parents. And they'd seen pictures of Sue, hadn't met her at that point. And we went up to the airport to pick Sue up, my brother and I, or to pick my sisters and her kids up, my brother and I, and my little niece looked at me as we were driving down the road coming back from the airport, and she looked at me and said, "Susan is Chinese. Does that mean that you and Aunt Kathy are Chinese too?"